A woman arrives in a frontier town with a satchel full of books and letters promising her a new life, only to discover that her intelligence threatens the man who sent her. But in this harsh landscape where most see only weakness, one man with a shadowed past recognizes the power of her mind. This is a story about finding value in what others reject, and how true worth is measured not by expectations, but by courage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly as the stagecoach rolled into Silver Creek, dust billowing around its wheels like ghosts of forgotten promises. Catherine Montgomery adjusted her spectacles and smoothed the wrinkles from her navy traveling dress, mentally reciting the Latin phrase that had become her mantra: Fortes fortuna adiuvat. Fortune favors the brave. At 36, Catherine was well aware she had long passed the age most considered suitable for marriage. Back in Boston, she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood, finding comfort in her books and her position as a school teacher. But when the school board had dissolved her position, claiming a woman with her excessive education was intimidating to the young men and unsuitable for teaching young ladies, she'd found herself adrift in a world that had no place for her. That was when she'd seen the advertisement. Educated man of property seeks refined Eastern lady as wife. The words of Thomas Fletcher's letters still warmed her heart, tucked as they were in the inner pocket of her traveling coat. He'd written of his successful cattle ranch, of his loneliness since his wife's passing 5 years prior, of his admiration for educated women who could bring culture and refinement to the frontier. She'd responded cautiously at first, but his replies had been everything she'd hoped. Thoughtful, articulate, seemingly genuine in his desire for a partner rather than merely a housekeeper or mother for children she could no longer bear. After 6 months of correspondence, she'd accepted his proposal, selling her small inheritance of books and furniture to fund the journey west. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Silver Creek's only hotel. Catherine gathered her courage, along with her carpetbag, and stepped down into the dusty street, her buttoned boots landing with a soft thud on Montana soil. Silver Creek was smaller than she'd imagined. A single main street, lined with weathered buildings, a general store with peeling paint, a saloon where rough-looking men lounged on the porch, and at the far end, a small whitewashed church whose steeple tilted slightly to the east. Several curious faces turned to watch her, a woman alone, clearly not from these parts, clutching a carpetbag in one hand and a small wooden case of books in the other. Catherine lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by their stares. "Miss Montgomery," she turned, hope rising in her chest. A man approached, tall and broad-shouldered in a well-made suit that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. His hair was the color of wheat, streaked with silver at the temples, and his mustache was neatly trimmed. This must be Thomas Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm so pleased to finally meet you." The man took her hand, his grip firm, but not crushing. "Indeed, I'm Thomas Fletcher. Welcome to Silver Creek." His eyes, a pale blue, assessed her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're older than I expected." Catherine stiffened. "I believe I mentioned my age in my second letter, Mr. Fletcher. 36 this past April." Yes. "Of course," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just different seeing you in person. Come, I've arranged a room for you at the hotel. We can discuss matters over dinner." As they walked the short distance to the hotel entrance, Catherine felt her initial excitement fading, replaced by a growing unease. Thomas Fletcher was handsome enough, and clearly prosperous by local standards, but there was something calculating in his gaze that hadn't been present in his letters. The hotel was modest but clean, with faded floral wallpaper and worn carpet underfoot. The proprietress, a stout woman named Mrs. Wilkins, showed Catherine to a small room on the second floor. "Dinner is served at 6 sharp, Miss Montgomery," Mrs. Wilkins said before leaving. "Mr. Fletcher has arranged for a private table." "Thank you," Catherine replied, setting her bags on the narrow bed once she was alone. She unpacked methodically, hanging her 2 good dresses in the wardrobe and arranging her most treasured books on the bedside table. Her father's copy of Shakespeare's collected works, her mother's Bible, and her own well-worn volumes of Austen, Shelley and Homer in the original Greek. From her carpet bag, she retrieved a small framed photograph of her parents, both long deceased, and placed it beside the books. At precisely 6 o'clock, Catherine descended to the hotel's small dining room. Thomas Fletcher was already seated at a corner table, rising as she approached. "You look refreshed," he commented as she took her seat. "I've ordered roast beef. It's the only decent thing they serve here." "Thank you," Catherine said, though she would have preferred to make her own selection. "I'm eager to hear more about your ranch, Mr. Fletcher. In your letters, you mentioned it was 10 miles outside of town." "Indeed, nearly 2,000 acres. The finest grazing land in the territory," Fletcher said, puffing up visibly. "I've built it from nothing into the most prosperous operation in the county." "That's quite impressive," Catherine said sincerely. "And you mentioned a library." Fletcher's expression shifted slightly. "Well, I have some books. Business volumes mostly. Record-keeping, that sort of thing." "Oh," Catherine said, trying to hide her disappointment. In his letters, he'd described shelves lined with literature's greatest treasures. The food arrived, tough beef and boiled potatoes, and they ate in silence for several minutes. Catherine was acutely aware of Fletcher studying her, his eyes moving from her face to her hands, which were ink-stained from her journal entries during the journey. "Tell me again about your education, Miss Montgomery," he said finally. "As I wrote, I was fortunate enough to study at the Boston Female Academy. My father was a professor of classical literature at Harvard, and he continued my education at home, particularly in Latin, Greek, and mathematics." She smiled at the memory. "He believed women's minds were as capable as men's, though society rarely gives them the opportunity to prove it." Fletcher's fork clattered against his plate. "And your teaching position? You were dismissed?" Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The school board decided my approach to education was unsuitable. I encouraged young women to pursue higher learning and young men to respect female intellect. This was not a popular position." Fletcher dabbed his mouth with his napkin, his expression unreadable. "I see, and what are your expectations of marriage, Miss Montgomery?" "I hope for partnership," she said honestly. "Mutual respect, companionship. In your letters, you spoke of wanting an intellectual equal, someone who could help with the business aspects of your ranch as well as bring refinement to your home." "Yes, well," Fletcher cleared his throat, "I may have overstated certain aspects. The truth is, Miss Montgomery, I need a practical woman, someone who understands her place, who can manage household affairs without questioning my business decisions." Catherine felt as though the floor were dropping beneath her. "I don't understand. Your letters specifically mentioned—" "Letters can be misinterpreted," Fletcher interrupted. "Or perhaps I wasn't clear enough about my requirements." "Requirements?" Catherine repeated, her voice growing cold. Fletcher leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Silver Creek is a small community, Miss Montgomery. People talk. A man in my position needs a wife who enhances his standing, not one who challenges the natural order of things." "And what order is that precisely?" Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Men lead, women support. Men build, women maintain. Men think broadly, women attend to details." Fletcher sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. "Your education is excessive. I need a wife, not a debate partner or a walking encyclopedia. Catherine set down her fork carefully, fighting to keep her voice steady. I see. Then I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding between us, Mr. Fletcher. Perhaps, he admitted, but not an insurmountable one. You're an intelligent woman. Surely you understand that you have limited options. You've come all this way at considerable expense, I imagine. Boston is a long journey back, especially for a woman of your situation. The implication was clear. An educated spinster past her prime, without family or fortune, had few prospects. He expected her to accept his terms out of desperation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Fletcher, Catherine said, rising from her chair, but I think we would both be better served by ending this arrangement before it begins. Fletcher's face darkened. Don't be hasty, Miss Montgomery. I'm offering you security, respectability. What else do you have? My self-respect, for one, she replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the trembling in her hands. Good evening, Mr. Fletcher. She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes burning into her back as she climbed the stairs to her room. Once inside, with the door firmly closed, Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure finally cracking. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. What now? She had enough money for perhaps 2 weeks of lodging. And then what? The return journey to Boston would cost more than she had, and even if she could afford it, what awaited? Her there, no position, no home, no family. A knock at the door startled her. She quickly composed herself, smoothing her hair and dress before opening it. Mrs. Wilkins stood in the hallway, her round face creased with concern. Everything all right, miss? Mr. Fletcher left in quite a state. There's been a misunderstanding, Catherine said carefully. Mr. Fletcher and I will not be proceeding with our arrangement. The older woman's eyes widened. Oh dear, that puts you in a pickle, doesn't it? Not many unmarried ladies in these parts without family. I'll manage, Catherine said, with more confidence than she felt. Is there any work available in town? I'm a trained teacher, but I'm willing to consider other positions. Mrs. Wilkins frowned thoughtfully. Town's too small for a proper school. There's the saloon, but that's no place for a lady like yourself. She hesitated. There might be something. Though, Doc Harris was saying just yesterday, he needs someone who can read his medical journals and help organize his records. His eyes aren't what they used to be. Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. That sounds promising. Could you introduce me to this Dr. Harris? First thing tomorrow, Mrs. Wilkins promised. For now, get some rest. Western men can be stubborn as mules, but they're not all cut from the same cloth as Thomas Fletcher. That man's got a reputation for wanting things just so. After Mrs. Wilkins left, Catherine sat at the small writing desk and opened her journal. Dipping her pen in ink, she'd always found clarity through writing. Silver Creek, Montana Territory. June 12th, 1878, my new beginning has ended before it truly started. Thomas Fletcher is not the man his letters portrayed. He seeks not a partner, but a possession, not an equal, but a subordinate. I refuse to diminish myself to satisfy his pride. Yet what alternatives remain? My funds are limited, my prospects uncertain, but I cannot, will not, surrender the core of who I am, even in the face of practical necessity. Tomorrow I will meet with Dr. Harris. Perhaps there lies an opportunity. She closed the journal and moved to the window, gazing out at the main street below. Night had fallen, and Silver Creek's few buildings glowed with lamplight. Despite everything, the frontier landscape stirred something in her, a sense of openness, of possibility that Boston, with all its rigid social structures, had never offered. As Catherine prepared for bed, a commotion outside drew her back to the window. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon across the street, At their center stood Thomas Fletcher, his face flushed with what she assumed was whiskey and wounded pride. His voice carried clearly through the night air. "Too much to learn," talking of Greek poetry and mathematics as if a woman has any business with such things. "Came all this way for a wife, and what do I get? A blue-stocking who thinks she's smarter than any man in the territory." The men laughed, and Catherine closed the curtains, her jaw tight with anger and humiliation. Word would spread quickly in a town this size. By morning, everyone would know about the mail-order bride too educated for Thomas Fletcher. Sleep eluded her for hours as she pondered her situation. She had spent her life believing that knowledge was power, that education would be her salvation. Now it seemed it might be her downfall. Dawn was breaking when Catherine finally drifted into a restless sleep, one thought circling in her exhausted mind. What use was all her learning if it left her stranded in a hostile wilderness with no path forward? Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. Catherine rose, washed at the small basin and dressed in her second-best dress, a forest green wool that had seen better days but still spoke of Eastern refinement. She braided her chestnut hair tightly and pinned it at the nape of her neck, then descended to the hotel dining room, bracing herself for whispers and stares. The few early risers barely glanced her way, more interested in their coffee and breakfast than in the newest scandal. Mrs. Wilkins bustled over, setting down a plate of eggs and biscuits. "Eat up, dear. We'll see Doc Harris at 9. His office is just down the street, next to the general store." Catherine nodded gratefully. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Wilkins." "Nonsense," the older woman said with a wave of her hand. "Fletcher's a fool if he thinks a woman can be too smart. His first wife could barely write her own name, and she was miserable until the consumption took her." At 9 precisely, Mrs. Wilkins led Catherine to a small, well-kept building with a shingle reading Ezekiel Harris, M.D. The doctor himself answered their knock. An elderly man with a full white beard and wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. "Mrs. Wilkins," he greeted warmly, then turned curious eyes to Catherine. "And who might this be?" "Dr. Harris, this is Miss Catherine Montgomery from Boston. She's a trained teacher looking for a position, and I remembered you mentioning needing help with your records and reading." Dr. Harris's bushy eyebrows rose with interest. "Indeed, please come in, ladies." The doctor's office was meticulously clean, but cluttered with books, journals, and papers stacked on every available surface. Medical diagrams covered the walls, and glass cabinets displayed neatly labeled bottles and instruments. "You're educated." "In the sciences, Miss Montgomery?" Dr. Harris asked as they settled into chairs. "My primary training is in classics and literature," Catherine admitted, "but I studied basic anatomy and chemistry as part of my teaching curriculum. More importantly, I'm a quick study and excellent with organization and record-keeping." Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "My eyes aren't what they used to be, and medical journals print in the most infernal small type these days. I need someone who can read aloud the latest research, help me catalog my notes, and perhaps assist with correspondence." Hope bloomed in Catherine's chest. "I would be honored to help with such work, Doctor." "I should mention," he said, peering at her over his spectacles, "that some of my patients may find it unusual to have a female assistant present during consultations." "I'm well acquainted with managing delicate sensibilities, Doctor," Catherine replied with a small smile. "In Boston, I once had to convince a school board that teaching young women basic algebra would not render them incapable of managing a household." Dr. Harris chuckled. "Yes, I heard about your encounter with Fletcher. Word travels fast in Silver. Greek." His expression turned serious. "Not everyone here shares his narrow views, Miss Montgomery. Some of us value education, regardless of whether it comes wrapped in trousers or skirts." "That's reassuring to hear, Doctor." "Now," he said, pulling a leather-bound ledger from a nearby shelf, Let's discuss practical matters. I can offer room and board at my home. My wife passed 2 years ago, but my housekeeper, Mrs. Coleman, is an excellent chaperone. The pay isn't much, I'm afraid, but the work would be steady." As they negotiated terms, Catherine felt her spirits lifting for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek. It wasn't the life she had journeyed west expecting, but perhaps it could be something better. Work that valued her mind rather than diminishing it. An hour later, Catherine left Dr. Harris's office with a position secured and arrangements made to move into a small room in his house that afternoon. The weight that had pressed on her chest since the previous evening's dinner had eased somewhat, though uncertainty still clouded her future. As she walked back toward the hotel, she noticed a group of men emerging from the sheriff's office across the street. At their center, hands bound behind his back, was a man unlike any Catherine had seen before. Tall and powerfully built, with raven black hair that fell to his shoulders and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Despite being a prisoner, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. "Who is that?" Catherine asked a woman sweeping the boardwalk outside the general store. The woman glanced up, her expression darkening. "That's Morgan Wade, former outlaw. They say he rode with the Hargrove gang years back, though he claims he's reformed." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "He has a ranch north of town now. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's been cattle rustling lately, and Fletcher convinced Sheriff Palmer to bring him in for questioning." Catherine watched as the sheriff led Wade toward the jail at the end of the street. Just before entering, the dark-haired man paused and turned, his gaze sweeping the street, and for a brief moment landing directly on Catherine. Something in that look, a recognition, not of her face but perhaps of something deeper, made her breath catch. Then he was gone, led inside the jailhouse, leaving Catherine with the strange sensation that their paths were destined to cross again, though she couldn't possibly imagine how or why. 3 weeks passed swiftly as Catherine settled into her new position with Dr. Harris. The work suited her methodical mind, organizing patient records, transcribing the doctor's notes, and reading aloud from medical journals while he prepared tinctures and compounds. Each evening, she retired to her small but comfortable room in the doctor's house, where Mrs. Coleman, the housekeeper, ensured she was well fed and respected. Yet despite finding unexpected refuge, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Whispers followed her through town. The educated Easterner too scholarly for Thomas Fletcher. Some viewed her with curiosity, others with suspicion, as if her learning might somehow be contagious. One stormy afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows of the doctor's office, Catherine was alone, organizing a new shipment of medical supplies. Dr. Harris had been called to a difficult berth at a farm several miles outside town, leaving her to mind the office in case of emergency. The door burst open, sending a spray of rainwater across the polished floorboards. A man staggered in, supporting another whose face was masked with blood. Catherine immediately set aside the bottle of iodine she'd been labeling and rushed forward. "Dr. Harris isn't here," she said, "but I can help. Bring him to the examination." Table. The uninjured man, a weathered cowhand she recognized from the general store, hesitated. "No disrespect, ma'am, but you ain't a doctor." "No, but I've assisted with enough treatments to know what needs doing," Catherine replied firmly. "Your friend is bleeding heavily, and Dr. Harris won't be back for hours. Would you prefer I do nothing?" The injured man groaned, making the decision. "For them. Just help me, lady. Head hurts something fierce." Catherine directed them to the examination table, her mind already cataloguing what she'd need: clean water, bandages, antiseptic solution. She worked efficiently, washing away the blood to reveal a deep gash along the man's hairline. "What happened?" she asked, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. "Bar fight at Sullivan's," the friend explained. "Frank here took exception to some remarks about his horse. Other fella had a ring that caught him good," Catherine nodded, focused on her task. The wound would need stitches, something she'd observed Dr. Harris do multiple times, but had never attempted herself. She sterilized a needle as she'd seen the doctor do, threading it with catgut. "This will hurt," she warned Frank, who merely grunted his understanding. Her hands were steady as she placed the first stitch, then the second. By the fifth, she'd found a rhythm, her movements precise and methodical. Frank remained stoic, only occasionally wincing as the needle pierced his skin. When she finished, Catherine applied a clean bandage, then mixed a powder for pain that she'd seen Dr. Harris prepare countless times. "Take this with water every 6 hours," she instructed, wrapping the doses in paper twists. "Keep the wound clean. Come back tomorrow so Dr. Harris can check my work." Frank touched the bandage gingerly. "Ain't too bad. Head's clearer already." His friend nodded approval. "Doc taught you good, miss?" "I observe carefully," Catherine replied simply. "That will be 50 cents for the treatment." After they left, Catherine cleaned the examination area thoroughly, then recorded the treatment in Dr. Harris's ledger, noting the procedure and materials used. She was completing this task when the door opened again, more gently this time. Tall figure stood silhouetted against the grey afternoon light, water dripping from a wide-brimmed hat and the shoulders of a long duster. As he stepped inside, Catherine recognized the man from the jailhouse. Morgan Wade. Up close, he was even more imposing, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, startlingly blue against his tanned skin, took in the room with a single sweep before settling on her. "Doctor not in?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that somehow matched his appearance perfectly. "He's attending a birth outside town," Catherine replied, straightening her spine. "I'm his assistant, Miss Montgomery. Is there something I can help with?" Wade removed his hat, revealing that raven-dark hair now tied back with a leather cord. Water dripped onto the floor, and Catherine noticed he was favoring his left arm. "I'll wait," he said, moving to sit on a bench near the door. Catherine studied him more carefully. His right hand was clenched around his left forearm, and even through the wet duster, she could see a darkening stain. "You're bleeding, Mr. Wade," she said matter-of-factly. "Dr. Harris may not return until evening. I've just finished stitching a head wound, and I'm perfectly capable of examining your arm." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by wariness. "You know my name. Silver Creek isn't large enough for anonymity, especially for those who've spent time in Sheriff Palmer's jail," she replied evenly. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." After a moment's consideration, he shrugged out of his duster, revealing a torn shirt sleeve soaked with blood. Catherine gestured to the examination table. "Please sit. I'll need to cut away the fabric to see the wound properly." Wade complied, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to physical exertion. As Catherine gathered supplies, she was acutely aware of his eyes following her every movement. "You're Fletcher's mail-order bride," he said suddenly. "The one too. Smart for his liking." Catherine's hands stilled momentarily. "I was never his bride, Mr. Wade. Merely a woman who made a long journey based on false pretenses." She approached with scissors, bandages, and antiseptic. "This may sting," she warned, as she began cutting away the blood-soaked fabric. The wound beneath was a clean slice about 4 inches long, deep enough to require stitches, but not life-threatening. "How did this happen?" she asked, cleaning the area with antiseptic solution. "Barbed wire," he answered simply. "Wind brought down a section of fence, was repairing it when the storm hit." Catherine nodded, threading another needle. "You'll need stitches. I assume you'd prefer I continue rather than wait for Dr. Harris." "You seem capable enough," Wade said, studying her face. "Where'd you learn medical skills? Didn't think they taught that in ladies' academies back east." "They don't," Catherine admitted, beginning the first stitch. "But my father believed in practical education alongside classical studies. He arranged for me to assist a physician friend one summer when typhoid fever swept through Boston. She worked steadily as she spoke. Later, as a teacher, I often tended to students' injuries. Children are remarkably adept at finding new ways to hurt themselves. Wade barely flinched as the needle pierced his skin. You talk like a scholar, but work like a frontiersman. I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. Wade, Catherine replied, tying off another stitch. It was meant as one. They fell into silence as she continued her work. Unlike most men Catherine had encountered, Wade seemed completely at ease with her competence, watching her with evident respect rather than suspicion or discomfort. As she tied off the final stitch, she noticed faded scars crisscrossing his arm, some clearly from knives, others that might have been bullet wounds. "You've led an eventful life," she observed, applying a clean bandage. Wade's expression revealed nothing. "Some events I'd have rather avoided." "The Hargrove gang?" she asked boldly, surprising herself. His eyes narrowed. "Town gossip travels fast. It's one of Silver Creek's primary industries, along with cattle and exaggeration," Catherine replied dryly as she cleaned her hands in a basin. "Were you guilty of what they suspected? The cattle rustling?" Wade stood, testing his bandaged arm with careful movements. "No, Fletcher knows it too, but he's never been one to let facts interfere with a grudge." "Why would he bear a grudge against you?" "Our properties share a boundary," Wade explained, reaching for his duster. "There's a water source he's always wanted. I refuse to sell." Catherine calculated the treatment cost, but as she turned to tell him, Wade was already placing $1 on the table, twice the standard fee. "For your skill," he said simply, "and discretion. Fletcher has friends who wouldn't approve of me seeking treatment here." "Your medical care is between you and Dr. Harris," Catherine replied. "Or in this case, you and me. No one else's business." Wade nodded, settling his hat back on his head. At the door, he paused. "Town's talking about you too, Miss Montgomery. Not all of it kindly. I've never particularly cared for others' approval, Mr. Wade," she said, though the words tasted slightly false even to her own ears. "Everyone wanted to belong somewhere. Good," he said, "because out here, approval is rarely given to those who deserve it most." With that cryptic observation, he stepped back into the rain, leaving Catherine puzzled by their encounter. When Dr. Harris returned that evening, soaked and exhausted from a successful but difficult delivery, Catherine reported the day's patients, including Wade. The doctor's bushy eyebrows rose. "Morgan Wade came here? Interesting." He examined her handiwork in the ledger. "Your stitching. Technique is improving. Frank's head looks professional. What do you know about Mr. Wade?" Catherine asked, trying to sound merely curious. Dr. Harris settled into his chair with a weary sigh. "Former outlaw, if rumors are true. Rode with the Hargrove gang in his younger days. Bank robberies mostly, some stagecoach heists. Nothing proven, mind you. He arrived in Silver Creek about 3 years ago, bought a ranch north of town with cash money, and has kept to himself since." "Is he dangerous?" The doctor considered this. "Not in the way most think. Wade's never started trouble in town, though he's finished it a time or two, when pushed. He reads, you know." This detail surprised Catherine. "Read what?" "Philosophy, history. Borrowed my copy of Marcus Aurelius last winter. Returned it with thoughtful notes in the margins." Dr. Harris smiled at her expression. "People are rarely as simple as we first judge them to be, Miss Montgomery. Something to remember in a town that's already decided who you are based on Fletcher's wounded pride." The following week brought oppressive heat that seemed to wilt everything it touched. Even in the relative cool of the doctor's office, Catherine found herself constantly wiping perspiration from her brow as she updated patient records. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see Mrs. Coleman, the doctor's housekeeper, her round face flushed with exertion. "Miss Montgomery," she gasped, "you must come quickly." "It's Dr. Harris." Catherine was on her feet instantly. "What's happened?" Collapsed in his study. He's conscious but can't seem to move his left side. His speech is all slurred. "Apoplexy," Catherine murmured, her mind racing through what she'd read in Dr. Harris's medical texts. "Stroke." She grabbed the doctor's bag and followed Mrs. Coleman at a run. They found Dr. Harris slumped in his study chair, one side of his face drooping, his left arm limp in his lap. His right hand clutched futilely at his chest. "Try to remain calm, doctor," Catherine said, kneeling beside him. "I need to examine you." His speech was garbled but understandable. "No, what's happening? Cerebral hemorrhage." Catherine checked. His pulse, rapid but strong, then tested his pupils and reflexes as she'd seen him do with patients. His left side showed minimal response. "Mrs. Coleman, we need to get him to bed. Then bring cool compresses and prepare a tincture of foxglove. 10 drops in water. It's in the blue bottle in his medical cabinet." Together, they managed to help the doctor to his bedroom, where Catherine loosened his collar and positioned him carefully on his side. "Need Palmer," Dr. Harris managed to say. "Sheriff Palmer?" Catherine asked, confused. "No, Dr. Palmer. Billings. Only physician within 50 miles. Catherine nodded, understanding. "Mrs. Coleman, is there someone who can ride to Billings immediately? The doctor needs more skilled care than I can provide." "Billy Jenkins at the livery could go," Mrs. Coleman said, wringing her hands. "But it's nearly 40 miles to Billings. Even riding hard, it would take hours to bring Dr. Palmer back." "Then we'll do what we can until help arrives," Catherine said firmly, though fear clutched at her heart. She'd assisted with many treatments, read countless medical texts, but this was far beyond her experience. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Catherine administered the foxglove tincture to strengthen the doctor's heart, applied cool compresses to reduce cerebral inflammation, and monitored his condition closely. Billy Jenkins departed for Billings with a note explaining the situation. But Catherine knew Dr. Palmer wouldn't arrive until morning at the earliest. As afternoon faded into evening, Dr. Harris's condition deteriorated. His breathing became labored, his periods of consciousness briefer. Catherine felt helpless, consulting his medical books between checking on him, searching desperately for anything she might have overlooked. She was changing his compress when a knock came at the front door. Mrs. Coleman answered it, and moments later, Morgan Wade appeared in the bedroom doorway. "Heard about the doctor," he said simply. "Came to see if there's anything needed." Catherine looked up, fatigue and worry etched on her face. "Unless you have medical training, Mr. Wade, I'm not sure what help anyone can offer right now." Wade stepped into the room, his eyes taking in the doctor's condition with a practiced assessment. "Stroke?" She nodded. "Affecting his left side. We've sent for Dr. Palmer from Billings, but he won't arrive until morning." Wade moved to the bedside, surprising Catherine by checking the doctor's pulse with practiced fingers. "Foxglove for the heart?" he asked, noting the empty medicine cup. "Yes," Catherine confirmed, her curiosity momentarily overriding her exhaustion. "How do you know about such treatments?" "Spent time with a Cheyenne healer years back," Wade said, his focus still on the doctor. "Learned some of their medicine, some of ours. Harris needs willow bark tea for the fever and lavender oil to ease his breathing." Catherine blinked in surprise. "Both are in his office. Mrs. Coleman could prepare them." Wade nodded and spoke quietly to the housekeeper, who hurried off to follow his instructions. He then turned back to Catherine. "You've done everything right so far. Now you need rest. I'll sit with him." "I couldn't possibly—" "You're exhausted," Wade interrupted gently. "No good to him if you collapse too. Sleep for a few hours. I'll wake you if there's any change." Perhaps it was the authority in his voice, or simply her own overwhelming fatigue, but Catherine found herself agreeing. Mrs. Coleman prepared a cot in the adjacent room, and Catherine lay down, expecting merely to rest her eyes briefly. She woke. With a start, hours later, moonlight streaming through the window. Panic seized her as she remembered Dr. Harris, and she rushed to his room, only to find Wade still there, sitting vigilant beside the bed. The doctor appeared to be sleeping peacefully, his breathing more regular than before. "His fever broke an hour ago," Wade said quietly. "Breathing steadier too." Catherine pressed a hand to Dr. Harris's forehead, cool and slightly damp. "The willow bark helped," she murmured. "Thank you." Wade shrugged off her gratitude. "Harris is a good man, one of the few who treated me decent when I first came to Silver Creek." They sat together in companionable silence, the only sounds the doctor's breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. After a while, Catherine's curiosity got the better of her. "How does a former outlaw learn medicine from a Cheyenne?" "Healer?" she asked softly. Wade's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. A decision being made. "After I left the Hargrove gang, I was shot by bounty hunters near the Powder River," he said finally. "Would have died if Two Hawks hadn't found me. He was a medicine man, an outcast from his tribe for reasons he never shared. He saved my life, taught me while I healed." "Why did you leave the gang?" Catherine pressed, sensing there was more to the story. Wade looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense in the dim light. "Because I could no longer justify doing wrong simply because life had wronged me." The simple honesty of his answer caught Catherine off guard. Before she could respond, Dr. Harris stirred, his right hand twitching against the blanket. "Water," he managed to whisper, his speech still slurred but clearer than before. Catherine helped him drink, relief washing over her as she noted the improved movement on his affected side. "Dr. Palmer should arrive by morning," she assured him. The doctor's eyes moved from her to Wade, confusion evident in his gaze. "Wade's been helping," Catherine explained. "He knows something about medicine." Harris nodded slightly, then drifted back to sleep, his breathing steady and unlabored. "He'll recover," Wade said with quiet certainty. "Not completely, perhaps, but enough." "How can you be so sure?" The colors returning to his face. "The paralysis is already lessening." Wade stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting. "I should go before the town wakes. My presence here might raise questions." Catherine followed him to the front door, acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, alone together in a house at night, yet somehow unconcerned by it. "Thank you," she said again as he stepped onto the porch. "I don't understand why you helped, but I'm grateful you did." Wade settled his hat on his head, his expression thoughtful. "You ever notice how people out here judge worth, Miss Montgomery? A man's measured by his strength, his land, how many cattle he runs. A woman by her beauty, her cooking, how many children she bears." He paused. "But the true measure is what you do when someone needs help. By that standard, you're worth more than most in Silver Creek." With that, he disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Catherine to ponder his words and the unexpected alliance forming between an educated spinster and a reformed outlaw. Two outsiders in a town that had already decided their worth. Dr. Palmer arrived from Billings shortly after sunrise, his weathered face grave as he examined Dr. Harris. Catherine explained the treatments they'd administered, careful to omit Wade's involvement to protect his privacy. The physician from Billings nodded approvingly at her actions. "You may have saved his life with your quick thinking," he told her. "The next few days will be critical, but I believe he'll recover, though perhaps not to his former capacity." His prognosis proved accurate. Over the following weeks, Dr. Harris regained some movement in his left side and much of his speech, though a noticeable slurring remained. His mind was as sharp as ever, but his hands shook too badly for delicate medical procedures. "You'll have to be my hands now," he told Catherine one afternoon as they sat in his study, the summer heat giving way to autumn's first crisp edges. "Palmer agrees," Silver Creek needs a physician, and you've shown remarkable aptitude. Catherine's eyes widened. Dr. Harris, I lack formal training. The town would never accept. The town already accepts you, he interrupted. You've been treating patients under my supervision for weeks. Mrs. Jenkins says her husband's broken arm healed. Straighter than when Palmer set his leg last year. Frank tells anyone who'll listen that your stitches barely left a scar. He shifted in his chair, his movements still awkward and stiff. I can teach you what you don't know. Between my knowledge and your quick mind, we can provide proper care. Until a trained doctor decides to settle in this godforsaken place, which might never. Catherine stared out the window, watching golden leaves swirl across the doctor's small garden. What he proposed wasn't exactly proper. Women physicians were rare even in eastern cities, and virtually unheard of on the frontier. Yet the idea, it thrilled her. Here was work of genuine value, a way to use her mind while truly helping others. I'll need to study, she said finally. Everything you can teach me. Dr. Harris smiled, the right side of his face lifting higher than the left. We'll start tonight with Gray's Anatomy. The illustrations alone will keep you awake for weeks. And so began Catherine's medical education in earnest. By day, she treated minor ailments and injuries under Dr. Harris's watchful eye. By night, she studied anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, absorbing knowledge with the same hunger that had once made her father's academic colleagues uncomfortably aware of their own intellectual limitations. Word of her new role spread through Silver Creek with mixed reactions. Some, particularly the women, expressed relief at having someone gentle-handed for female complaints. Others grumbled about the impropriety of a woman practicing medicine, even under supervision. Thomas Fletcher proved the most vocal critic. When Catherine encountered him outside the general store one crisp October morning, his contempt was palpable. "Playing doctor now, Miss Montgomery?" he asked, blocking her path as she attempted to enter. I wonder what the Territorial Medical Board would think of Harris allowing an untrained woman to treat patients. Catherine met his gaze steadily. Dr. Harris supervises all treatments, Mr. Fletcher. Perhaps you should direct your concerns to him. A man half crippled by stroke, Fletcher sneered. Hardly a proper supervisor. This town deserves better than a spinster with delusions of medical knowledge. Several onlookers had gathered, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Catherine felt her cheeks warm, but refused to be cowed. This town deserves someone who cares about its people's well-being, she replied evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mrs. Coleman is waiting for her supplies. She attempted to step around him, but Fletcher shifted to block her again. I warned you that your excessive education would cause problems. First you presume to know better than a man about marriage, now about medicine. Where will it end? Is there a problem here? The deep voice came from behind Catherine. She didn't need to turn to know it was Morgan Wade. She'd recognize that. Distinctive timbre anywhere. In the weeks since Dr. Harris's stroke, Wade had appeared occasionally at the doctor's office, ostensibly for checkups on his healing arm, but seeming more interested in discussing the medical texts Catherine was studying. Fletcher's face hardened at Wade's appearance. Nothing that concerns you, Outlaw. Wade moved to stand beside Catherine, not touching her, but close enough that his presence felt like a shield. Miss Montgomery is trying to conduct business. You're interfering, and you're involving yourself. Where you're not wanted, Fletcher snapped. As usual, the tension between the men crackled like static before a lightning strike. Catherine sensed histories and grievances beyond her knowledge, but understood she was merely a convenient battleground. For their existing animosity, gentlemen, she said firmly, I have patience waiting. Whatever quarrel exists between you can surely be conducted without my presence. Wade stepped aside immediately, gesturing for her to pass. After a moment's hesitation, Fletcher did the same, though his eyes burned with barely contained fury. "This isn't finished," he muttered as Catherine finally entered the store. Through the window, she watched the two men exchange more words before separating, Wade heading toward the livery stable and Fletcher toward the saloon. Neither looked pleased with the encounter. Inside, Catherine found the storekeeper's wife, Martha Wilson, watching with undisguised curiosity. "Those two have been at odds since Wade arrived in Silver Creek," Martha confided as she gathered Catherine's order. "Fletcher claims Wade's ranch rightfully belongs to him. Says the previous owner promised to sell to him before Wade appeared, with cash money. Is there truth to his claim?" Catherine asked, counting coins for her purchase. Martha shrugged. "Hard to say. Previous owner was old Jack Simmons, died of pneumonia before the sale was properly recorded. Some say Fletcher had a verbal agreement. Others say he just assumed Simmons would sell to him because he's got the largest spread hereabouts." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "What I do know is Wade paid a fair price to Simmons' widow. Fletcher offered less, thinking she had no choice but to accept." This new information cast Fletcher's animosity toward Wade in a different light. It wasn't just about water rights, as Wade had implied, but about a man unaccustomed to being refused what he wanted. First land, and later a bride who knew her own mind. Catherine pondered this as she returned to the doctor's office, wondering what other currents ran beneath Silver Creek's placid surface. That evening, as she sorted newly arrived medical supplies, the office door opened to reveal Wade, a leather-bound book tucked under his arm. "Thought you might find this useful," he said without preamble, placing the book on her desk. "Franklin's notes on galvanic treatments. Electricity's effects on the nervous system might help with Harris's recovery." Catherine examined the volume with surprise. "This is a recent publication. How did you obtain it?" "I subscribe to medical and journals," Wade replied matter-of-factly. "Have them sent from Chicago." She raised an eyebrow, increasingly intrigued by the contradiction this man presented. "May I ask why a rancher with no formal medical training reads scientific journals?" Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Same reason a school teacher studies anatomy texts until midnight. Curiosity doesn't require credentials." Catherine smiled, despite herself. "Touché, Mr. Wade." She opened the book, noting marginalia in a neat, precise hand. "Are these your notes?" He nodded. "Tried some of the treatments on an old cavalry horse with muscle damage. Saw improvement." "You experimented with medical electricity on a horse?" Catherine couldn't hide her astonishment. "Horse didn't object," Wade said with a faint smile, "and it walks better now." Before Catherine could respond, the door opened again. Sheriff Palmer entered, his weathered face solemn beneath his grey mustache. "Wade," he acknowledged with a curt nod, before turning to Catherine. "Miss Montgomery, I need the doc." "Dr. Harris is resting," she replied. "I've been handling patients in his stead. What's the matter?" Palmer hesitated, glancing between her and Wade. "Got a situation at Holloway's ranch. Their youngest took a bad fall from the hayloft. Arm's broken, but that's not the worst. Got a head injury too, unconscious and bleeding." Catherine was already reaching for the doctor's bag. "I'll come immediately. Dr. Harris taught me how to set bones, and I've assisted with head wounds before." "No disrespect, ma'am, but this is serious. Boy could die." "All the more reason not to waste time debating who treats him," she countered, filling the bag with necessary supplies. "Dr. Harris isn't physically capable of the journey, and the child can't wait for Dr. Palmer to arrive from Billings." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Holloway's lived 12 miles out. Not proper for a lady to ride that far alone, especially with night coming on." "I'll escort her," Wade said unexpectedly. "My horse is fresh, and I know a shortcut across the ridge that cuts 3 miles off the journey." Palmer's frown deepened. "Fletcher won't like it." "Fletcher isn't dying with a head wound," Wade replied bluntly. "The boy is. Your choice, Sheriff." After a moment's deliberation, Palmer nodded. "I'll send word to Harris where you've gone." "Wade, she's your responsibility." "I'm my own responsibility, Sheriff," Catherine corrected, securing the medical bag. "Mr. Wade is merely providing directions and protection from coyotes." 20 minutes later, they were riding hard out of town, Catherine on a sturdy mare borrowed from the livery, and Wade on his own midnight black stallion. The sun was already dipping toward the western mountains, painting the prairie gold and amber. Despite the urgency of their mission, Catherine couldn't help feeling a wild exhilaration as they galloped across the open landscape. In Boston, ladies rode side saddles at a sedate pace through manicured parks. Here, necessity demanded she ride astride. Her skirts hiked scandalously high, the wind whipping her hair from its pins. Wade led them off the main trail onto a narrow path that climbed a rocky ridge. Below, a river glinted in the fading light, winding like a silver ribbon through the valley. "The view almost makes one forget our grim errand," Catherine remarked as they paused briefly to rest the horses. Wade nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon, with the alertness of a man accustomed to watching for danger. "Beauty and brutality live side by side out here. You learn to appreciate one without ignoring the other." They reached the Holloway Ranch as dusk deepened into twilight. Lamplight glowed from the windows of a modest cabin, and a cluster of anxious vases greeted them in the yard. Mr. Holloway, his wife, and 3 older children. "Thank the Lord," Mrs. Holloway cried when she saw the medical bag in Catherine's hand. Her relief quickly turned to confusion. "Where's the doctor, Dr. Harris?" "Is recovering from a stroke," Catherine explained, dismounting swiftly. "I'm his assistant, Miss Montgomery. I've been treating patients under his guidance. Where's the boy?" Mr. Holloway, a tall, gaunt man with work-hardened hands, looked skeptical. "You're a nurse?" "I'm whatever your son needs right now," Catherine replied firmly. "Please, time is crucial with head injuries." Something in her tone must have conveyed her competence, for Holloway nodded and led her into the cabin. On a narrow bed in the corner lay a small boy of perhaps 8 or 9, his face deathly pale beneath a blood-soaked bandage. Catherine set to work immediately, removing the crude bandage to reveal a deep gash across the boy's forehead and temple. His right arm lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. She examined his pupils, checked his pulse, and listened to his breathing, her movements efficient and focused. "The arm is a clean break," she told the anxious parents. "I can set it, but the head injury concerns me more. There may be pressure building inside his skull." Mrs. Holloway clutched her husband's arm. "Will he die?" "Not if I can help it," Catherine replied, opening her medical bag. "I need clean water, as many lamps as you have for better light, and fresh linen torn into strips. Mr. Wade, I'll require your assistance." The next 2 hours passed in intense concentration as Catherine cleaned and stitched the head wound, then carefully set the broken arm. Wade assisted silently, anticipating her needs with unexpected skill, handing her instruments before she asked and helping hold the boy still during the most delicate procedures. The true challenge came when Catherine determined that blood was indeed pooling beneath the boy's skull, creating pressure that could prove fatal. With steady hands, she performed a procedure she'd only read about, carefully drilling a small hole through the bone to relieve the building pressure. "This will allow the blood to drain," she explained to the horrified parents. "Without it, the pressure could damage his brain beyond recovery." Throughout the procedure, Wade remained at her side, his presence reassuring despite the gravity of the situation. When it was complete and a small amount of dark blood had drained from the opening, Catherine dressed the wound and finally stepped back, exhaustion etching lines in her face. "Now we wait," she told the Holloways. "The next few hours are critical. If he regains consciousness, that's a positive sign." Mrs. Holloway, who had watched the entire procedure with a mother's terrified fascination, suddenly embraced Catherine. "Thank you," she whispered. "The sheriff said you were just the doctor's helper, but you knew exactly what to do." "Knowledge doesn't reside solely in university halls or behind masculine facades," Catherine replied gently. "It belongs to anyone dedicated enough to pursue it." Wade, who had been washing blood from his hands in a basin by the door, caught her eye at these words. Something passed between them, a moment of perfect understanding that needed no verbal expression. They stayed through the night, taking turns watching the boy while the exhausted family rested. Near dawn, Catherine was dozing in a chair beside the bed when a small voice woke her. "My head hurts." She opened her eyes to find young Jamie Holloway looking at her, confused but conscious. His eyes were clear, focusing properly, and when she asked him simple questions, he answered coherently. "You're going to be just fine," she told him, relief washing through her like a cleansing tide. By mid-morning, the boy was sitting up, drinking broth, and complaining about the cast on his arm. All excellent signs of recovery. Catherine left detailed instructions for his care and promised to return in a week to check his progress. As she and Wade prepared to depart, Mr. Holloway approached, hat in hand. "Miss Montgomery," he said gruffly, "I owe you an apology. I doubted you because you're a woman. If you were a man with half your skill, I wouldn't have questioned you for a second." "Many wouldn't admit that truth, Mr. Holloway," Catherine replied. "Your recognition of it speaks well of your character." He pressed payment into her hand, more than the standard fee, and added awkwardly, "The boy wants to know if it's true that girls can be doctors. His sister's been asking the same since you arrived." Catherine smiled, glancing at the oldest Holloway daughter who watched from the porch, eyes wide with newfound possibility. "Tell them both that the mind has no gender, Mr. Holloway. Healing comes from knowledge, skill, and compassion, qualities available to anyone willing to develop them." The ride back to Silver Creek was slower, both Catherine and Wade fatigued from the night's exertions. As they traveled, Catherine found herself studying her companion with new appreciation. He had been invaluable during the procedure, steady-handed, knowledgeable, and completely supportive of her authority in the situation. "You never questioned my ability to treat the boy," she observed, as they rode side by side across a golden meadow. Wade considered this. "I've seen you stitch wounds and set bones. I've watched you study medical texts most doctors would find challenging. Why would I question you? Most men would. I'm not most men," he replied simply, "just as you're not most women." They crested a hill, and Silver Creek came into view below, smoke rising from chimneys against the clear autumn sky. Catherine realized she was seeing it differently now, not as a place of exile or disappointment, but as a community where she had found an unexpected purpose. "What will they say, do you think?" she asked, nodding toward the town. "About a woman performing emergency surgery, about us riding out together." Wade's expression hardened slightly. "Some will say you overstepped your place. Others will thank God you did. As for us," he shrugged, "people believe what fits their expectations. Fletcher will likely claim I corrupted you. And what would you say to that?" Catherine asked, surprised by her own boldness. Wade looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense in the morning light. "I'd say you're incorruptible, Miss Montgomery. Not because you're perfect, but because you think for yourself." He paused, then added quietly, "It's a rare quality, in men or women." As they rode down toward the town, Catherine pondered his words. In Boston, her independent thinking had been viewed as a flaw, evidence of an unwomanly nature. Here, to this man at least, it was a virtue to be admired. Perhaps there was a place for her in this rugged landscape after all, not as Thomas Fletcher's submissive wife, or even just as Dr. Harris's assistant, but as a woman valued for the very qualities society had taught her to suppress. What neither of them noticed was the rider watching from a distant ridge. a man whose expression darkened as he observed their easy companionship and the obvious respect between them. Thomas Fletcher turned his horse toward town, determination hardening his features into something dangerous. This new development would not stand. He would make sure of it. News of young Jamie Holloway's miraculous recovery spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. Within days, Catherine found herself the subject of whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when she entered a room, and appraising glances that ranged from admiration to suspicion. Dr. Harris was delighted with her success. Trepanation is a procedure most trained physicians would hesitate to attempt, he told her, examining her detailed notes on the procedure. You may have saved not just the boy's life, but his mind. Catherine should have felt only satisfaction, but unease lingered. Some in town don't share your approval, she said, arranging medicines on a shelf. Mrs. Wilson at the general store suggested I was getting above myself. Reverend Thompson has invited me to a special sermon on the proper sphere of womanhood. Dr. Harris chuckled, though the sound was lopsided due to his lingering facial paralysis. The proper sphere of womanhood apparently doesn't include saving children's lives. How inconvenient for those children. It's not just that, Catherine admitted, lowering her voice, though they were alone in the office. There are rumors about Mr. Wade and me, about our overnight stay at the Holloways. The doctor's expression sobered. People will talk, especially when a woman steps beyond traditional boundaries. The question is whether their talk matters to you. Catherine considered this. In Boston, social approval had been currency she couldn't afford to squander. Here in Silver Creek, she was already an outsider. Perhaps that position offered a freedom she'd never considered. Their talk doesn't change what's true, she said finally. I haven't done anything improper with Mr. Wade, nor have I exceeded my abilities as your medical assistant. Then stand firm, Dr. Harris advised. In my experience, frontier towns eventually judge people by their usefulness, not their conformity. His words proved prophetic. The following week brought a steady stream of patients, not just the usual injuries and ailments, but women with female complaints they'd previously endured. In silence, now willing to confide in someone who shared their gender. Catherine treated them all with the same careful attention she'd given Jamie Holloway, gradually winning trust through competence rather than credentials. Morgan Wade appeared occasionally, sometimes with minor injuries sustained in ranch work, other times bearing medical texts or journals he thought might interest her. Each visit drew glances and gossip, but Catherine found herself increasingly indifferent to the town's opinions. One crisp November morning, as frost etched delicate patterns on the office windows, Catherine was cataloguing medicinal herbs when the door burst open. A young woman stumbled in, her face bruised, blood seeping from a cut on her lip. "Miss Lucy," Catherine exclaimed, recognizing one of the women who worked at Sullivan's saloon. "What happened?" Lucy collapsed into a chair, clutching her side. "Client got rough," she gasped. "Said I laughed at him. Didn't mean to, just nervous." Catherine helped her to the examination table, gently removing the shawl wrapped around her trembling shoulders. The bruises extended down her neck and disappeared beneath her bodice. "I need to examine you properly," Catherine said. "May I help you undress?" Lucy nodded, tears streaking through the powder on her cheeks. As Catherine helped remove her dress, the extent of the damage became visible. Deep bruises mottled her ribs, and a boot-shaped mark darkened her lower back. "Who did this?" Catherine asked, her voice tightly controlled as she began treating the injuries. "New fellow, big cattle buyer passing through. Fletcher's been showing him around town." Lucy winced as Catherine applied antiseptic to her split lip. "He paid extra for special treatment. Madam Josie said I had to go with him." Catherine's hands stilled. "This man is a friend of Thomas Fletcher's." Lucy nodded miserably. "Fletcher brought him to the saloon last night. Said he's looking to invest in local ranches. As Catherine finished treating the visible injuries, she heard the office door open. Dr. Harris appeared, his gait still uneven but steadier than it had been weeks ago. "Miss Lucy," he acknowledged without surprise. "Happened again, I see." "You've treated her for similar injuries before?" Catherine asked. The doctor nodded grimly. "Hazard of her profession, unfortunately. Though this looks worse than usual." Catherine helped Lucy dress, her mind working through what she'd observed. The injuries were systematic, deliberately inflicted, not the random bruises of drunken roughness, but the calculated marks of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "You can't go back there," she told Lucy firmly. "Not with this man still in town." "Got nowhere else," Lucy replied dully. "Madam Josie won't cross Fletcher or his friends. They bring too much business." Dr. Harris cleared his throat. "My housekeeper mentioned needing help with laundry and cooking. Perhaps you could stay with us for a few days until your injuries heal and this cattle buyer moves on." Lucy's eyes widened. "You'd do that for someone like me?" "We treat all patients with dignity," Catherine said, helping her to her feet, "regardless of their occupation." After settling Lucy in the doctor's house with strict instructions for rest, Catherine returned to the office, her thoughts troubled. Dr. Harris was writing prescriptions at his desk, his handwriting shaky but legible. "This cattle buyer concerns me," she said. "Lucy's injuries suggest a man who deliberately inflicts pain, and his connection to Fletcher." The doctor looked up. "Fletcher's been different lately, drinking more, talking loudly about maintaining standards and teaching proper respect. Some say he's angry about losing a land deal. Others blame your rejection and subsequent friendship with Wade." "My friendship with Mr. Wade is hardly Fletcher's concern," Catherine replied, though she knew the situation was more complex than she acknowledged. Dr. Harris fixed her with a penetrating gaze. "Be careful, Catherine. Men like Fletcher believe they're entitled to whatever they desire. Being thwarted only fuels their determination." That evening, as Catherine walked from the doctor's office to his residence, she noticed a group of men exiting the saloon across the street. Thomas Fletcher's voice carried clearly in the cold air, louder than usual and tinged with whiskey. "Finest cattle operation in 3 territories," he was saying to a heavy-set man in an expensive coat. "Once I acquire Wade's water rights, I'll double my herd." "Thought you said this Wade fellow refuses to sell," the stranger replied. "Presumably the cattle buyer responsible for Lucy's injuries." Fletcher laughed, the sound harsh in the gathering dusk. "Every man has his breaking point. Wade's coming up fast." Catherine quickened her pace, not wanting to be noticed, but it was too late. Fletcher had spotted her. "Miss Montgomery!" he called, crossing the street with his companion. "Just the lady we were discussing." Catherine stopped, drawing herself up to her full height, though it still left her looking up at both men. "Mr. Fletcher, I was not aware I was a topic of conversation among cattlemen." "Allow me to introduce Mr. Silas Blackwood," Fletcher said, ignoring her coolness. "From Chicago, looking to invest in promising ranches." Blackwood tipped his hat, his smile not reaching his small, close-set eyes. "Pleasure, ma'am. Fletcher here. Tells me you're quite the curiosity, a lady doctor in the wilderness." "I'm Dr. Harris's assistant," Catherine corrected, noticing a fresh cut on Blackwood's knuckle, consistent with striking someone's teeth. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to." Fletcher stepped closer, blocking her path. "Mr. Blackwood is hosting a dinner at the hotel tomorrow evening. Several prominent citizens will attend. Your presence would add a cultured element." The invitation surprised Catherine, though she immediately distrusted its motivation. "I appreciate the offer, but I must decline. Dr. Harris needs my assistance in the evenings." "Surely the old man can spare you for one night," Blackwood said, his tone making the words more command than request. "I insist. I'm particularly interested in hearing about your unconventional approach to medicine." Catherine met his gaze. directly, keeping her expression neutral despite the chill that ran through her at the calculated interest in his eyes. "Perhaps another time, Mr. Blackwood. Good evening, gentlemen." She stepped around them and continued toward the doctor's house, feeling their eyes on her back and resisting the urge to hurry. Only when she was safely inside did she release the breath she'd been holding. Lucy was in the kitchen with Mrs. Coleman, her bruised face partially hidden by her hair as she peeled potatoes. She looked up when Catherine entered, her expression apprehensive. "I saw you talking to them," she said quietly. "Blackwood ask about me?" "No," Catherine assured her, removing her shawl, "though I recognize the marks his knuckles left on your face." Lucy's hands trembled. "Be careful, Miss Montgomery. He likes educated women, says they're more entertaining when they break." The blunt warning sent a chill through Catherine. Has he hurt others like me? In Denver there was a schoolteacher. Blackwood took an interest. When she refused him, Lucy looked down at the potato in her hands. They found her by the river, said it was suicide, but Madame Josie heard different from girls who worked there. Catherine sank into a chair, processing this disturbing information. And Fletcher is bringing this man into Silver Creek society, introducing him to local families? "Fletcher needs Blackwood's money," Lucy explained. "Rumor is he's in debt. Made some bad investments, lost a herd to disease last spring. Blackwood wants land with water, same land Wade owns." The pieces began falling into place in Catherine's mind. Fletcher's financial troubles, his desperation to acquire Wade's property, his alliance with a man like Blackwood. It wasn't just about wounded pride anymore, but a dangerous combination of economic necessity and personal vendetta. "I need to warn Mr. Wade," she said, half to herself. Lucy's eyes widened. "You'd go to his ranch? Alone? People already talk about you two." "Let them talk," Catherine replied, her decision crystallizing. "This is more important than gossip." Early the next morning, Catherine borrowed a horse from the livery stable, telling Dr. Harris she needed to check on Jamie Holloway's recovery. It wasn't entirely a falsehood. She did intend to visit the Holloways, but only after speaking with Wade. The ride to his ranch took longer than she expected. Unlike Fletcher's sprawling operation, Wade's property was modest, a small cabin, with a barn and corral nestled in a valley where two streams converged. The strategic value of the water rights was immediately apparent. As she approached, Catherine saw Wade splitting wood outside the cabin, his powerful strokes reducing logs to even pieces with methodical precision. He paused when he noticed her, setting down his axe and wiping his brow. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "Is something wrong?" "I'm afraid so," she replied, dismounting. "May we speak privately?" Inside the cabin, Catherine was struck by its unexpected refinement. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on diverse subjects: medicine, law, philosophy, literature. A desk held neat stacks of papers and ledgers. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted, speaking of a man who valued quality over ostentation. Wade prepared coffee as Catherine explained what she'd learned about Blackwood and his connection. To Fletcher, "This confirms what I've suspected," he said when she finished. "Fletcher's been pressing harder than usual to buy my land. Last week he offered twice its value. You refused." "Land with reliable water is beyond price in this territory," Wade replied, setting a steaming mug before her. "Besides, I don't trust Fletcher's sudden generosity." Catherine warmed her hands on the mug. "Lucy believes Blackwood is dangerous. Genuinely dangerous, not just rough. She mentioned a schoolteacher in Denver." Wade's expression darkened. "Abigail Winters. I read about her death. Authorities ruled it suicide, but circumstances were suspicious. You followed the case?" "I make it my business to know about men like Blackwood," Wade said grimly. "Men who believe their money entitles them to take whatever they want. Land, respect, women's dignity." Catherine studied him over the rim of her mug. "You're not what people in town believe you are, Mr. Wade." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Neither are you, Miss Montgomery." He leaned forward, his expression serious again. "Fletcher invited me to dinner tonight. Said Blackwood wants to meet all local ranchers before deciding where to invest." "He invited me as well," Catherine admitted. "I declined." "Perhaps you should reconsider," Wade suggested thoughtfully. "If we both attend, we can observe Blackwood more closely, maybe learn what he and Fletcher are planning." Catherine hesitated. The prospect of spending an evening in Blackwood's company was deeply unappealing, yet Wade's reasoning made sense. "It would be safer than confronting them directly," she acknowledged. "We'd need to be careful," Wade warned. "Fletcher will be watching us both." "Then we'll give him something to watch," Catherine decided, a plan forming in her mind. "If he believes we're preoccupied with each other, he may speak more freely around us." Wade's eyebrows rose. "You're suggesting we pretend to court?" "I'm suggesting we use their expectations against them," Catherine clarified, though she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "They already gossip about us. Let them think their suspicions are correct, that we're too absorbed in each other to notice their schemes." Wade considered this, his blue eyes thoughtful. "It's risky. For your reputation, if nothing else." "My reputation was compromised the moment I stepped off that stagecoach as Thomas Fletcher's mail-order bride," Catherine replied wryly. "I've come to realize that freedom can be found in others' disapproval. When you've already scandalized a town, there's little left to lose." A slow smile spread across Wade's face, a genuine one that transformed his usually solemn features. "Miss Montgomery, I believe Boston's loss is Silver Creek's gain. You have a strategist's mind. I prefer to think of it as survival instinct," she replied, though his approval warmed her more than she cared to admit. "Now, if we're to attend this dinner, we should establish our strategy." They spent the next hour planning their approach, agreeing to arrive separately but create opportunities to be observed in close conversation. Wade would listen for information about Fletcher's financial situation, while Catherine would attempt to learn more about Blackwood's background and intentions. As she prepared to leave, Wade walked her to her horse, his expression troubled. "I still don't like putting you in Blackwood's path," he admitted. "Men like him recognize intelligence as a challenge, not an attribute to respect." "All the more reason to confront him in a public setting," Catherine pointed out, mounting her horse. "Besides, I'll have you watching over me." "Always," Wade said, the single word carrying a weight that lingered in the air between them. Catherine rode away with mixed emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. Their plan was logical, even necessary, but it had awakened feelings she'd long suppressed. Not just the thrill of intellectual partnership, but something deeper, more personal. Wade saw her mind as an asset rather than a liability, her education as valuable rather than excessive. In Boston, she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood, believing that no man would want a woman whose intellect might challenge his own. Thomas Fletcher had confirmed that belief with his rejection. Yet here was Morgan Wade, an enigma of a man with a shadowed past and a mind as hungry for knowledge as her own, treating her as an equal partner in confronting a common threat. As Catherine rode toward the Holloway Ranch to maintain her cover story, she recognized the irony of her situation. She'd journeyed west, seeking a husband who valued her mind, only to be rejected for the very quality she prized. Now she was pretending to court a former outlaw to protect him and herself from the man who had spurned her. The frontier, it seemed, had its own peculiar sense of justice. The Silver Creek Hotel rarely hosted formal gatherings. Its dining room, normally reserved for traveling salesmen and the occasional circuit judge, had been transformed for Blackwood's dinner with white tablecloths and polished silverware borrowed from the town's more affluent residents. Candles flickered in tarnished holders, casting a golden glow that softened the room's utilitarian edges. Catherine arrived precisely on time, wearing her best dress, a deep burgundy wool with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd arranged her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style, and wore her mother's cameo brooch at her throat. Small touches of refinement that spoke of her Eastern background without appearing ostentatious. Fletcher greeted her at the door, barely concealing his surprise that she'd accepted the invitation. "Miss Montgomery," he said, bowing slightly, "you look appropriate. Mr. Blackwood will be pleased you reconsidered his invitation." "Professional curiosity," Catherine replied smoothly. "I rarely have the opportunity to discuss medicine and science with visitors from Chicago." Fletcher's expression suggested he doubted her motives, but he escorted her into the dining room. Nonetheless, 6 other guests were already present: Mayor Wilson and his wife, Sheriff Palmer, the bank manager Mr. Hargrove, and his spinster sister, and Reverend Thompson. All regarded Catherine with varying degrees of curiosity and reserve. Silas. Blackwood rose from his seat at the head of the table, his broad frame somehow more imposing in formal evening wear. "Miss Montgomery," he boomed, gesturing to an empty chair near his own. "Our guest of honor arrives. Please sit beside me." Catherine smiled politely, but made no move toward the indicated seat. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. I believe we're still awaiting another guest." As if on cue, the door opened and Morgan Wade entered. The room fell silent. Where Catherine had dressed to accentuate her respectability, Wade had transformed himself completely. Gone were the practical ranch clothes and worn duster. In their place, he wore a perfectly tailored black suit that highlighted his powerful physique, a crisp white shirt and a silver brocade waistcoat. His dark hair was neatly trimmed and combed back from his face, accentuating the striking blue of his eyes. He looked not like an outlaw or even a simple rancher, but like a successful businessman or perhaps a senator. A man of substance and authority. Several of the women present, including the bank manager's sister, audibly caught their breath. "Mr. Wade," Fletcher said tightly, clearly displeased by his rival's unexpected sophistication. "I wasn't certain you would join us. I never refuse an opportunity to meet new investors in our community," Wade replied smoothly, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Catherine. Something flashed in his eyes, appreciation perhaps, or something deeper, before he crossed to her side. "Miss Montgomery," he said, taking her hand and bowing over it with practiced grace, "you look radiant this evening. May I escort you to the table?" Catherine accepted his arm, acutely aware of the shocked expressions around them. "Thank you. Mr. Wade, how fortuitous to find you here." They moved toward the table together, a united front that immediately altered the room's dynamics. Fletcher's face darkened with barely suppressed fury, while Blackwood watched with calculating interest. "I believe you were saving a seat for Miss Montgomery near you, Mr. Blackwood," Wade said, his tone courteous but firm. "However, as we have medical matters to discuss, perhaps you'd allow me to sit beside her instead." Before Blackwood could respond, Wade had pulled out a chair for Catherine halfway down the table, positioning them both at a diplomatic distance from their host. The other guests awkwardly rearranged themselves, Fletcher ending up beside Blackwood at the head of the table, his expression thunderous. The dinner began with stilted conversation, comments about the weather, the recent illness that had affected several local families, the difficulty of getting fresh produce in winter months. Catherine noted that Wade ate and drank sparingly, his attention seemingly focused on her, while his awareness clearly encompassed the entire room. "Mr. Blackwood," Mayor Wilson asked eventually, "Fletcher mentioned you're interested in investing in local ranches. What draws you to our humble territory?" Blackwood dabbed his mouth with a napkin, his small eyes glittering in the candlelight. "Expansion, Mayor Wilson. Chicago's meatpacking industry grows insatiable. The future belongs to those who control the supply chain from grazing land to stockyard. A vision that requires substantial water rights, Wade observed mildly, something increasingly scarce in this region. Blackwood's gaze fixed on him. Indeed, Mr. Wade, which makes properties like yours particularly valuable. I understand your land contains the headwaters of Parker Creek. It does, Wade confirmed, along with natural springs that remain reliable, even in drought years. A fortunate position, Blackwood commented. One might say, unexpectedly fortunate for a man of your background. The room grew quiet at this thinly veiled reference to Wade's rumored outlaw past. Fortune favors those who recognize opportunity when others see only obstacles, Catherine interjected smoothly, placing her hand briefly on Wade's arm. Mr. Wade has transformed that property through scientific breeding of drought-resistant cattle and innovative irrigation techniques. Wade's expression remained impassive, but Catherine felt his arm tense beneath her touch. She'd just revealed knowledge of his ranching operations that she shouldn't possess unless they'd been in close communication. You seem remarkably well informed. About Mr. Wade's business affairs, Miss Montgomery, Fletcher observed, his tone insinuating. One might wonder when you found time to study ranching between medical emergencies. Educated people discuss substantive matters when they meet Mr. Fletcher, Catherine replied coolly. Not everyone limits conversation to weather and local gossip. A few uncomfortable chuckles circled the table. Mrs. Wilson leaned forward, clearly attempting to diffuse the tension. Miss Montgomery, I heard about your remarkable surgery on the Holloway boy. Drilling into his skull. How terrifying that must have been. Catherine seized the opportunity to shift the conversation. Medical procedures often appear more frightening than they are, Mrs. Wilson. The trepanation technique dates back to ancient civilizations. The Greeks documented it extensively. As she spoke about medical history, Catherine was acutely aware of Blackwood studying her with increasing interest. His expression reminded her uncomfortably of a collector appraising a rare specimen. You have an unusual mind, Miss Montgomery, he interrupted during a pause in her explanation. Most women would faint at the mere description of such procedures, yet you perform them with your own hands and discuss them over dinner. Most women haven't had the opportunity for education, Catherine corrected him. Given access to knowledge, many would surprise you with their capabilities. Perhaps, Blackwood conceded, though his tone suggested skepticism. Yet I wonder if such intellectual pursuits fulfill a woman's natural desires. Surely you must long for a more traditional life, a home, a husband, children? The question was inappropriately personal, designed to remind everyone present of her status as Fletcher's rejected bride. Catherine felt Wade shift beside her, preparing to intervene, but she placed a hand on his knee beneath the table, a silent request to let her handle this. I find fulfillment in using the gifts God provided, she replied evenly. My mind is as much his creation as any other aspect of my being. To ignore it would seem ungrateful. Don't you agree, Reverend Thompson? The minister, caught off guard at being addressed directly, cleared his throat. Well, the good book does tell us not to hide our light under a bushel. Precisely, Catherine smiled. Though I admit Silver Creek has offered me unexpected opportunities to shine my particular light. I arrived seeking one path and discovered another far more suited to my abilities. Her gaze briefly met Wade's, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared understanding that was not lost on the others present. Fletcher leaned forward, his patience clearly exhausted. Let's dispense with metaphors, shall we? Miss Montgomery arrived as my potential bride and has since begun an inappropriate association with Wade, who has repeatedly blocked community progress by refusing to sell his water rights. The blunt statement fell like a stone into a still pond, ripples of shock spreading across the table. Thomas, Mayor Wilson cautioned, this is hardly appropriate dinner conversation. On the contrary, Fletcher insisted, his voice rising, everyone is thinking about it. No one says it. Miss Montgomery presents herself as a dedicated medical assistant, while obviously cultivating a scandalous relationship with a man known to have ridden with outlaws. Meanwhile, Wade prevents the region's largest ranch from expanding by clinging to land he acquired under suspicious circumstances. Wade remained remarkably calm, though Catherine could sense the controlled tension in his body. My land was purchased legally from Jack Simmons' widow, with proper documentation filed at the county seat, he said quietly. As for my friendship with Miss Montgomery, it is based on mutual respect and shared intellectual interests, concepts I don't expect you to comprehend, Fletcher. Respect? Fletcher scoffed. Is that what you call it when an unmarried woman visits your ranch alone? When you appear together at all hours, attending to medical emergencies? Catherine's cheeks burned, but her voice remained steady. Mr. Fletcher, your disappointment at finding me unsuitable as a bride does not give you the right to impugn my character or Mr. Wade's. My professional duties sometimes require traveling at unconventional hours with proper escorts. Nothing improper has occurred. I'm sure many in this room would disagree, Fletcher responded, looking pointedly at Reverend Thompson, who squirmed uncomfortably. What exactly are you suggesting? Fletcher, Wade asked, an edge of danger entering his voice for the first time. Blackwood raised his hands in a placating gesture. Gentlemen, please. We're here to discuss business, not personal matters. He turned to Catherine with an appraising smile. Though I must say, Miss Montgomery, your situation intrigues me. I've always admired women of intelligence and spirit. Perhaps you'd consider returning to Chicago with me when my business here concludes. I could introduce you to medical circles there, perhaps even sponsor formal training. The offer, coming amid the tense exchange, caught everyone by surprise, none more than Catherine herself. She blinked, processing the unexpected proposal. A generous offer, she finally managed, though my commitments to Dr. Harris and the community here would make that difficult. Everyone has their price, Blackwood said smoothly. I've found that proper incentives can overcome most commitments. Wade's expression hardened. Miss Montgomery isn't a commodity to be purchased, Blackwood. No, Blackwood raised an eyebrow. Yet she traveled across the country based on Fletcher's promises. Clearly she's willing to relocate for the right opportunity. Catherine felt her composure slipping. The conversation had spiraled into territory both demeaning and dangerous. Mr. Blackwood, while I appreciate your interest in my medical career, I make my own decisions based on more than financial considerations. Of course, Blackwood conceded with a predatory smile, though I wonder if your friendship with Mr. Wade might be influencing those decisions. Perhaps if he were no longer a factor. The implied threat hung in the air. Wade's hand moved slightly toward his waistcoat, where Catherine suspected he carried a concealed weapon despite the formal setting. I believe we've exhausted this topic, she said firmly, rising from her chair. If you'll excuse me, I should check on Dr. Harris. He wasn't feeling well when I left. Wade stood immediately. I'll escort you. That won't be necessary, Fletcher interjected. Sheriff Palmer can see. Miss Montgomery safely home. The sheriff looked distinctly uncomfortable at being drawn into the conflict. Actually, I should be getting back to the office myself. Reports to file. Catherine seized the opening. Then Mr. Wade's escort would be most appreciated, Sheriff, since his ranch lies in the same direction. Before Fletcher or Blackwood could object further, Catherine and Wade had made their farewells to the other guests and departed, leaving an atmosphere charged with unresolved tension behind them. Outside, the night air was crisp and biting, stars pricking the black velvet sky with diamond clarity. Wade offered Catherine his arm, which she took gratefully, her legs unsteady after the confrontation. That went precisely as planned. she said once they were beyond earshot of the hotel. They revealed more than they intended. Wade nodded grimly. Blackwood's offer wasn't spontaneous. He's been watching you, gathering information. The suggestion that I might be no longer a factor was a clear threat, and his interest in me is disturbing, Catherine admitted. Lucy's warning about the schoolteacher in Denver seems increasingly relevant. They walked in silence for a moment, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The town was quiet, most windows dark except for the saloon, where piano music mingled with raucous laughter. Your reputation has been compromised, Wade said finally. Fletcher made sure of that tonight, Catherine sighed. My reputation has been in jeopardy since I arrived in Silver Creek. First as the mail-order bride, too educated for Thomas Fletcher. Then as the woman presuming to practice medicine without formal training. Adding inappropriate association with Morgan Wade merely completes my transformation into a social pariah. Despite the gravity of their situation, Wade's mouth twitched with amusement. When you put it that way, we make quite the pair. The outlaw and the blue-stocking, scandalizing, proper society. Hardly the life I envisioned when I left Boston, Catherine admitted, allowing herself a small smile. Though I'm finding it has unexpected advantages. Such as freedom, she said simply. When people already disapprove of you, their opinions lose their power. They reached Dr. Harris's house, pausing at the gate. Light glowed warmly in the downstairs window, and Catherine could see the doctor's silhouette as he moved around his study. What happens now? She asked, turning to face Wade. In the moonlight, his features were cast in silver and shadow, highlighting the strong lines of his face. Blackwood won't give up easily, Wade replied. Not on the water rights, and not on you. He strikes me as a man accustomed to acquiring whatever catches his interest. And Fletcher, desperate, Wade said grimly. The references to my suspicious acquisition of the land suggest he's searching for legal angles to challenge my ownership. We need to be prepared for both legal and less conventional attacks. Catherine shivered, not entirely from the cold. We've made ourselves targets by appearing united tonight. We were already targets, Wade corrected gently. Now they know we're not isolated or vulnerable. He reached out, hesitating briefly before adjusting the shawl around her shoulders, his fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. Get some rest, Catherine. Tomorrow we'll need to warn Dr. Harris about what's coming. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it warmed her more than the shawl. Good night, Morgan, she replied, testing the sound of his name on her lips. He smiled, that rare, transformative expression that revealed the man beneath the careful reserve. Then, with a slight bow that somehow managed to be both formal and deeply personal, he turned and walked back toward the livery stable where he'd left his horse. Catherine watched until his figure disappeared into the shadows, then entered the house, her mind racing with the evening's revelations and the growing certainty that tomorrow would bring new challenges neither of them could fully anticipate. Inside, Dr. Harris waited in his study, a glass of brandy in his hand, and concern etched on his face. I see you survived Blackwood's dinner, he said, gesturing for her to sit. From Mrs. Coleman's gossip, the entire town expected bloodshed before dessert. Catherine sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how tense her body had been throughout the evening. No bloodshed, but plenty of threats, both veiled and direct. As she recounted the evening's events, the doctor's expression grew increasingly troubled. Blackwood's offer to take you to Chicago, that's particularly worrying, he said when she finished. Lucy told Mrs. Coleman about a pattern with him. He becomes fixated on educated women, pursues them relentlessly, and when they refuse... She mentioned the schoolteacher in Denver, Catherine acknowledged. Do you think I'm in genuine danger? Dr. Harris swirled the brandy in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. I think Blackwood is a predator who's identified. New prey, and Fletcher is a desperate man with a wounded ego. Together they present a very real threat to you and to Wade. What should we do? Catherine asked, though she already suspected the answer. Be visible, the doctor advised. Stay in public spaces when possible. Don't travel alone, especially after dark. He hesitated, then added reluctantly, perhaps consider accepting Wade's protection more formally. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting marriage, Doctor? I'm suggesting that conventions exist for a reason, he replied dryly. Sometimes they offer protection as well as constraints. She considered this, turning the evening's events over in her mind. Wade and I have an understanding based on mutual respect and common interests. I won't rush into marriage out of fear, even if your feelings for him run deeper than respect. Dr. Harris completed gently when she trailed off. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. My feelings are irrelevant to the current situation. We need to focus on countering Fletcher and Blackwood's schemes. The doctor studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But remember, Catherine, even the most independent mind sometimes benefits from alliance with another. Don't let pride prevent you from accepting help when it's offered from the right source. With those words echoing in her thoughts, Catherine retired to her room, where sleep eluded her for hours as she replayed the evening's confrontation and wondered what new challenges tomorrow would bring to Silver Creek. Dawn arrived with a pale winter light filtering through her window. Catherine rose early, still tired, but determined to face whatever the day might bring. As she dressed, she noticed activity in the street below, a small crowd gathering outside the sheriff's office across the way. Curious, she hurried downstairs. Dr. Harris was already at the breakfast table, the newspaper spread before him, his expression grim. You'll want to see this, he said, pushing the Silver Creek Weekly Gazette toward her. The headline made her blood run cold. Questions raised about local medical practices. Chicago investor expresses concerns about unlicensed practitioner. The article, clearly influenced by Blackwood and Fletcher, detailed growing community concerns about Catherine's role in treating patients, questioning her qualifications and suggesting that Dr. Harris's stroke had impaired his judgment in allowing her to perform procedures. It specifically mentioned the trepanation of Jamie Holloway, describing it as dangerous experimentation by an unqualified woman. This is Fletcher's revenge, Catherine said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the paper, and Blackwood's attempt to discredit me. Notice they don't actually name you, Dr. Harris observed. Just refer to the doctor's female assistant. Keeps them just shy of libel while ensuring everyone knows precisely who they mean. The front door burst open, and Mrs. Coleman hurried in, her round face flushed with indignation. Have you seen what they're saying? It's outrageous. Half the town's talking about it already. Mrs. Holloway is fit to be tied. Came into the general store shouting about how Miss Catherine saved her boy when no one else could have done it. At least we have some defenders, Catherine said, touched by the woman's loyalty. More than you might think, Mrs. Coleman replied. That's what the gathering's about at the sheriff's office. People are demanding to know what Palmer intends to do about the article. He's saying there's no law against printing opinions, but folks are angry, especially those you've treated. Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. The community is divided into fractions. Fletcher and Blackwood may have miscalculated by attacking your medical work rather than just your association with Wade. People might gossip about propriety, but they care deeply about who tends their injuries and illnesses. Catherine stood, decision crystallizing. I need to speak with Sheriff Palmer myself. If Fletcher and Blackwood are using the newspaper to undermine my position, this is about more than personal reputation. It's about whether I can continue to provide medical care to this community. You'll be walking into a hornet's nest, Dr. Harris warned. Emotions are running high. All the more reason to present a calm, professional response, Catherine replied, reaching for her shawl. If I hide away, it only reinforces their narrative. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear, the kind of winter day where every sound carried for miles across the frozen landscape. As Catherine approached the sheriff's office, she could hear raised voices from within. She recognized Frank's distinctive bellow, the man whose head wound she had stitched on her first day alone in the office. "My wife would have bled to death if Miss Montgomery hadn't known what to do," he was saying. "It doesn't matter to me if she's got a fancy piece of paper from some Eastern college. She saved Mary's life when the baby came early." Catherine paused. On the boardwalk, listening, Sheriff Palmer's measured tones responded, though she couldn't make out his exact words. Then another voice joined in, deep, authoritative, unmistakably Wade's. "The territorial statutes regarding medical practice allow for apprenticeship under a licensed physician," he was saying. "Dr. Harris has formally registered Miss Montgomery as his apprentice with the territorial offices in Helena. I dispatched the paperwork myself 3 weeks ago. The documents should arrive any day." Catherine blinked in surprise. Wade had never mentioned this legal protection he'd arranged for her. Before she could process this revelation, the door swung open, and several men exited the sheriff's office, nearly colliding with her. "Miss Montgomery!" Frank exclaimed. "We was just talking about you. Telling the sheriff this newspaper nonsense is pure horseshit, begging your pardon for the language." "I appreciate your support, Mr. Davis," Catherine replied, suddenly finding herself the center of attention as more people noticed her presence. Wade emerged from the office, his expression shifting from surprise to something warmer when he saw her. He was dressed once again in his practical rancher's clothes, but carried himself with the same quiet dignity he'd displayed at dinner. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her. "I was just explaining to Sheriff Palmer about your legal standing as Dr. Harris's medical apprentice." "A fact I wasn't aware you'd addressed," she replied, giving him a questioning look. A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "I should have consulted you first, but after our discussion about your future here, it seemed prudent to establish formal protection for your position." Sheriff Palmer appeared in the doorway looking harassed. "Miss Montgomery, perhaps you'd better come inside. This situation is getting out of hand." Catherine followed him into the office, Wade close behind her. Mayor Wilson was already inside, looking uncomfortable as he twisted his hat in his hands. "This article has stirred up considerable sentiment," the sheriff said, gesturing to the newspaper on his desk. "It doesn't make specific accusations, but the implications are clear enough. Fletcher and Blackwood are in my office every hour demanding I investigate your medical practices." "On what grounds?" Catherine asked calmly. "I've operated under Dr. Harris's direct supervision, as the law allows. That's what I've been telling them," Palmer sighed. "But Blackwood's throwing his weight around, threatening to contact the territorial governor if we don't address his concerns about public safety." Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. "The town council meets tomorrow. Blackwood has requested time to address the issue formally. As a major potential investor in the region, we can't simply dismiss him. And if his goal is to discredit Miss Montgomery and pressure Wade into selling his land," Wade asked pointedly, "are you prepared to sacrifice both to secure his investment?" The mayor had the grace to look abashed. "No one's sacrificing anyone, Wade, but we need to consider all perspectives, including those of the patients Miss Montgomery has treated successfully," Wade pressed. "The lives she's saved, the comfort she's provided to those suffering." Catherine placed a gentle hand on Wade's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I appreciate your defense, Mr. Wade, but I can speak for myself." She turned to the mayor and sheriff. "Gentlemen, I understand your difficult position. Allow me to address the town council tomorrow alongside Mr. Blackwood. Let the community hear both sides and make their own judgment." Sheriff Palmer nodded, slowly. That seems fair, though I warn you, Fletcher's rallied his supporters. It could get contentious. Truth often faces opposition, Catherine replied steadily, but it prevails in the end. As they left the sheriff's office, Catherine and Wade walked side by side down the main street, acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them. You shouldn't have to defend your right to use your knowledge and skills, Wade said quietly, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. Yet I must, Catherine replied. Not just for myself, but for Dr. Harris, for the patients who trust us, and for every girl like young Sarah Holloway who might dare to dream of becoming more than society prescribes. Wade stopped walking, turning to face her fully. You continue. To surprise me, Catherine Montgomery, most people fight for self-preservation. You fight for principles. As do you, she pointed out. You could sell your land to Fletcher, take the money, and establish yourself elsewhere without these complications. Yet you stay, defending what's rightfully yours. A smile touched his lips. Perhaps we're both stubborn fools. Or perhaps we recognize that some things are worth fighting for, she countered, even when victory seems uncertain. Their eyes held for a moment, the connection between them deepening with each shared challenge. Then the church bell rang, breaking the spell, and they continued walking toward Dr. Harris's office, their shoulders occasionally brushing in a silent affirmation of their alliance. Neither noticed Thomas Fletcher watching from the shadows of the alley beside the newspaper office, his face contorted with a bitterness that had festered into something dangerous. Nor did they see Silas Blackwood observing from the hotel window, his calculating gaze following Catherine's every movement with the focused intensity of a predator selecting its prey. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Catherine's future in Silver Creek, but the very soul of the community itself. The town hall stood at the center of Silver Creek, a simple clapboard building that served multiple purposes as courthouse, meeting place, and occasional venue for dances and celebrations. On this bitter December morning, it was filled to capacity, with townspeople packed shoulder to shoulder on rough wooden benches. The air was thick with tension, and the mingled scents of wool, leather, and wood smoke. Catherine sat in the front row beside Dr. Harris, whose presence, despite his weakened condition, provided silent testimony to his support. She wore her most professional attire, a high-necked navy dress with minimal ornamentation, her hair pulled back in a simple yet elegant knot. The image she presented was one of dignity and competence, not defiance. Behind them sat many of the patients Catherine had treated over the past months, the Holloway family. Frank Davis and his wife Mary, Lucy from the saloon, sitting discreetly near the back, and numerous others whose injuries and ailments she had tended. Their presence heartened her, though she kept her expression composed, hands folded calmly in her lap. Morgan Wade entered just as Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order. He moved quietly to stand at the back of the room, his tall figure drawing glances from those seated nearby. When Catherine turned to look at him, he gave her a slight nod, a silent promise of support that steadied her nerves. We're gathered today to address concerns raised about certain medical practices in our community, Mayor Wilson began, his usual jovial manner subdued by the gravity of the occasion. Mr. Silas Blackwood, a respected businessman from Chicago, has requested time to speak on this matter. Blackwood rose from his seat near the front, his expensive suit and gold watch chain marking him as an outsider in this frontier setting. Fletcher sat beside him, satisfaction evident in his smug expression. Thank you, Mayor Wilson. Citizens of Silver Creek, Blackwood began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. I come before you not as an outsider seeking to impose my views, but as a concerned investor with your community's best interests at heart. He paced slowly before the assembly, his movements calculated to command attention. During my brief time here, I've been impressed by your town's potential. Silver Creek could become a significant hub for the cattle industry with proper development and investment. However, I've also observed practices that give me grave concern. Practices that, in more established communities, would be considered not merely unorthodox, but dangerous. His gaze settled on Catherine, his expression a masterful blend of regret and concern. I speak specifically of allowing an untrained woman to perform complex medical procedures without proper credentials or oversight. While Miss Montgomery's intentions may be admirable, good intentions cannot replace years of formal medical training. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others objecting. Blackwood raised his hands for silence. "Consider the risks you're accepting," he continued. "Would you allow an untrained person to build your home, knowing it might collapse in the first storm? Would you entrust your legal affairs to someone who had merely read law books without certification? Then why entrust your very lives, and those of your children, to someone whose qualifications amount to reading medical texts under the supervision of a physician incapacitated by stroke?" Dr. Harris attempted to rise at this, his face flushed with anger, but Catherine placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her battle to fight. "I propose a solution," Blackwood announced. "As a gesture of goodwill toward Silver Creek, I'm prepared to fund a proper physician's residence and practice, a qualified, university-trained doctor from Chicago who could provide the standard of care this growing community deserves." This offer drew appreciative murmurs from some quarters of the room. Blackwood smiled, sensing advantage. "Furthermore," he continued, "recognizing Miss Montgomery's obvious intelligence, I would personally sponsor her attendance at the Women's Medical College of Chicago, where she could obtain proper training rather than practicing dangerous improvisation on unsuspecting patients." The room erupted in discussion. Catherine rose slowly, waiting for Mayor Wilson to restore order before speaking. "Mr. Mayor, may I respond?" she asked, her voice clear and steady despite the hammering of her heart. Wilson nodded, looking relieved at her composed demeanor. "The floor is yours, Miss Montgomery." Catherine moved to stand where Blackwood had been, facing the assembled townspeople directly. She took a deep breath, centering herself. "Mr. Blackwood speaks of qualifications and credentials," she began. "These have value, certainly, but here on the frontier, their luxuries often unavailable to us. What matters more are results. Lives saved, suffering eased, healing facilitated." She gestured toward the Holloway family. "Ask young Jamie whether he cares about my lack of a diploma, or whether he's simply grateful the pressure on his brain was relieved before permanent damage occurred." She turned to Frank and Mary Davis. "Ask Mary whether my dangerous improvisation harmed her when her baby came early, or whether the techniques I'd learned from Dr. Harris's texts saved both their lives. The truth," Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength, "is that Silver Creek, like many frontier communities, must make do with the resources available. Dr. Harris has provided excellent medical care here for 15 years. When his stroke limited his physical abilities, he generously shared his knowledge with me so that this community wouldn't be left without medical assistance." She looked directly at Blackwood. "As for Mr. Blackwood's generous offer of sponsorship, I must question both its timing and motivation. Why would a Chicago investor suddenly develop such concern for Silver Creek's medical care? Perhaps because I formed an alliance with Morgan Wade, whose water rights Mr. Blackwood covets for his cattle investment with Mr. Fletcher." Fletcher surged to his feet. "That's an outrageous accusation. Blackwood is offering to help this town, and you respond with suspicion and ingratitude." Sheriff Palmer stood. "Sit down, Fletcher. Miss Montgomery has the floor." Catherine nodded gratefully to the sheriff before continuing. "I don't deny Mr. Blackwood's offer appears generous on its surface. But I wonder, would this new doctor be independent or beholden to the man who installed him? Would he serve all patients equally or favor those aligned with certain business interests? She paused, letting the implications sink in. Mr. Wade has informed me that formal recognition of my apprenticeship under Dr. Harris has been filed with the Territorial Medical Board. While I lack university training, my position as a medical apprentice is legally recognized under territorial statutes. This revelation clearly surprised Blackwood and Fletcher, who exchanged glances. Catherine pressed her advantage. I don't claim to be a fully qualified physician, she continued. I work under Dr. Harris's supervision, continuing to learn every day. What I offer this community is not perfect medical care, but dedicated, conscientious treatment based on current medical knowledge and practices. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those she'd treated. I ask only to continue serving you as I have these past months, with Dr. Harris's guidance, with transparency about my limitations, and with a commitment to expanding my skills and knowledge for your benefit. As Catherine returned to her seat, Jamie Holloway suddenly stood up, his arm still in its cast. Miss Montgomery saved my life, the boy declared. Ma says the hole she drilled in my head let the bad blood out so my brain could heal. I don't care if she went to school for it or not. She fixed me when I was broken. The simple testimony from the child broke the tension, drawing laughter and nods of agreement from many present. One by one, others stood to speak, Mary Davis describing how Catherine had stopped her hemorrhaging during childbirth, an elderly man recounting how she'd identified his lung fever when he'd thought it merely a persistent cough. Even Lucy rising nervously to testify about Catherine's compassionate treatment of her injuries. As the testimonials continued, Catherine noticed Wade moving quietly along the side of the room until he stood near the front, his presence a silent counterbalance to Fletcher and Blackwood. Mayor Wilson finally raised his hands for order. We've heard compelling arguments from both sides. Mr. Blackwood's concerns about proper medical credentials cannot be dismissed, but neither can the practical evidence of Miss Montgomery's positive impact on our community. He turned to Dr. Harris. Doctor, as our town's only licensed physician, your opinion carries particular weight. Do you believe Miss Montgomery's continued practice under your supervision poses a danger to this community? Dr. Harris rose slowly, supporting himself with his good arm on the bench. In 30 years of medical practice, I've trained 3 apprentices who went on to become licensed physicians, he said, his speech still slightly slurred, but his mind evidently sharp. Catherine Montgomery has shown more natural aptitude and dedication than any of them. Her gender and lack of formal university training are irrelevant compared to her demonstrated skill and judgment. He fixed Blackwood with a stern gaze. As for bringing in an outside physician, any doctor who genuinely wishes to serve this community would be welcome to establish a practice here. But attempting to force out someone who has already proven her value suggests motives beyond public health concerns. Blackwood's expression hardened. You're all being sentimental rather than practical, he said dismissively. Frontier medicine may accept such compromises, but as Silver Creek grows, it will need proper medical care, not well-meaning amateurs. Better a well-meaning amateur who stays through winter fevers and summer accidents than a proper physician who appears only when investment opportunities arise, Wade commented from his position near the wall, drawing murmurs of agreement. Mayor, Wilson cleared his throat. I believe we've heard enough to make a determination. The town council will confer briefly and render a decision. As the council members, the mayor, sheriff, bank manager, and Reverend Thompson withdrew to deliberate, the room buzzed with speculation. Catherine remained seated, her outward composure masking inner turmoil. She'd spoken her truth, but would it be enough? Dr. Harris patted her hand reassuringly. You did well, he murmured. Whatever they decide, you've shown this town your true character. Wade approached, bending slightly to speak quietly to them both. "Fletcher and Blackwood are conferring by the door. They look concerned. I suspect they didn't anticipate the community's support for you." "Support is one thing," Catherine replied softly. "Official sanction is another. The council members all have business relationships with Fletcher. But they also have personal relationships with you," Wade pointed out. "You've treated their families, eased their suffering. That creates bonds stronger than business interests." Before Catherine could respond, the council members returned. The room fell silent as Mayor Wilson took his place at the front. "After careful consideration," he announced, "the town council has reached the following decision. Miss Montgomery may continue her medical practice under Dr. Harris's supervision, with the understanding that she will pursue formal certification through correspondence with the Women's Medical College when such arrangements can be made." Relief washed through Catherine, though she maintained her composed expression. The mayor continued, "Mr. Blackwood's offer of funding for a town physician is appreciated but declined at this time. Should he wish to make other investments in our community, they will be considered on their individual merits." Fletcher stormed to the front, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You're choosing an unqualified woman over progress and proper medical care because she's curried favor by treating a few simple ailments." "That's enough, Thomas," Sheriff Palmer said firmly. "The council has decided. Based on emotion, rather, than reason," Fletcher retorted, "just like a woman using sentiment to cloud clear judgment." He turned to face the crowd. "And you all fall for it, swayed by a pretty face rather than facts." Blackwood placed a restraining hand on Fletcher's arm. "This isn't helping our cause," he murmured, though his voice carried in the suddenly quiet room. "We'll find another approach." The implied threat hung in the air as the two men departed, Fletcher pausing at the door to cast a venomous glance at Catherine and Wade before slamming it behind him. As the meeting dissolved into smaller groups, discussing the outcome, Wade approached Catherine directly. "It's not over," he said quietly. "Fletcher and Blackwood won't accept defeat so easily." "I know," she agreed, "but we've won this battle at least." The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulations and well-wishes from townspeople, many seeming genuinely relieved that Catherine would continue providing medical care. By evening, she was exhausted but quietly triumphant, sitting in Dr. Harris's study reviewing patient notes while he dozed in his chair by the fire. A knock at the door roused her from her work. Mrs. Coleman hurried to answer it, returning moments later with a concerned expression. "Miss Montgomery, it's Mr. Wade. Says it's urgent." Catherine found Wade on the porch, his expression grim in the lantern light. "Fletcher and Blackwood left town an hour ago," he said without preamble, "with 3 men I don't recognize. Rough-looking. Characters hired from the mining camp up north, according to the livery stable boy. They were heading toward my ranch." "Why would they—" Catherine began. Then understanding dawned. "The deed to your property. If they can't force you to sell legally," Wade nodded grimly, "they'll try to intimidate me, or worse, destroy the documentation proving my ownership. Either way, I need to get back to the ranch immediately." "I'm coming with you," Catherine said decisively. "Out of the question," Wade replied. "It's too dangerous." "Which is precisely why you shouldn't face them alone," she countered. "Besides, if they've hired men from the mining camp, injuries are likely. You may need medical assistance." Wade studied her face, seeing the determination there. "There's no talking you out of this, is there?" "None whatsoever," she confirmed. "Give me 2 minutes to gather supplies and inform Dr. Harris." 20 minutes later they were riding hard through the darkness, the winter moon casting enough light to follow the trail. Catherine had changed into a split riding skirt, borrowed from Lucy, scandalously practical garments that the former saloon girl had used for quick escapes from troublesome clients. A medical bag was secured to her saddle, and Wade had insisted she carry a small Derringer pistol in her pocket. Fletcher's desperate, Wade explained as they rode, with Blackwood threatening to withdraw his investment if he can't secure my water rights. Fletcher faces financial ruin. Men in that position are particularly dangerous. And Blackwood seems the type who doesn't accept rejection gracefully, Catherine added, thinking of Lucy's warnings about the man's vindictive nature. They approached Wade's ranch with caution, dismounting a quarter-mile away and proceeding on foot through a stand of cottonwoods. The cabin was dark, but 5 horses were tethered outside, confirmation that Fletcher, Blackwood, and their hired men had indeed arrived first. "Wait here," Wade whispered, drawing his revolver. Catherine gripped his arm. "No, together or not, at all." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, and they crept closer to the cabin. Voices drifted through the partially open door, Fletcher's agitated tone, Blackwood's cooler responses, and the occasional gruff comment from one of the hired men. "It must be here somewhere," Fletcher was saying. "Wade wouldn't keep the deed at the bank where anyone could access the records." "Check behind the books," Blackwood suggested. "Men like Wade often think they're cleverer than they are." Wade tensed beside Catherine, clearly restraining himself from confronting the intruders immediately. They watched as shadows moved past. The window, the hired men ransacking the cabin, pulling books from shelves, overturning furniture. "What's your plan?" Catherine whispered. "The sheriff," Wade murmured. "Fletcher's actions constitute breaking and entering, possibly attempted theft. If we can get Palmer out here to witness this—" "That would take hours," Catherine objected. "They'll be gone by then, possibly with your deed." Wade's expression was grim in the moonlight. "Then we confront them, try to stall until dawn, when others might pass by on the main trail." Before they could decide, a shout came from inside. "Found something! Hidden compartment in the desk!" Wade moved instantly, Catherine close behind him. They burst through the door to find Fletcher holding a leather document case, Triumph written. Across his face, Blackwood stood nearby while the 3 hired men, burly unshaven figures in mining clothes, turned in surprise at the intrusion. "Breaking and entering, Fletcher," Wade said coldly, his revolver trained on the group. "Not to mention attempted theft. Sheriff Palmer will be interested to hear about this." Fletcher recovered quickly from his surprise. "3 witnesses will testify you threatened us with a gun when we came to discuss business. It's our word against yours, Wade." "And mine," Catherine added, stepping into the light. "A witness whose testimony was considered reliable enough by the town council just this morning." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Miss Montgomery, how unexpected, though perhaps not, given your unusual relationship with Mr. Wade." "Put down the document case, Fletcher," Wade commanded, ignoring Blackwood's insinuation. "I don't think so," Fletcher replied, a new confidence in his voice. "Johnson, Reynolds, Green, earn your pay." The 3 hired men moved forward, clearly intending to overwhelm Wade despite his weapon. Catherine acted instinctively, pulling the derringer from her pocket and firing a shot into the ceiling. The deafening report in the confined space froze everyone momentarily. "The next shot won't hit wood," she said firmly, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Blackwood laughed, genuine amusement in his voice. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Montgomery. What a waste of potential, burying yourself in this backwater, when you could be making a statement in Chicago society." "I am making a statement," Catherine replied evenly, "that education belongs wherever it's needed, not just where it's fashionable. That a woman's mind is her own to use as she sees fit. That true value isn't measured by social convention, but by genuine contribution." Wade used the distraction of their exchange to move closer to Fletcher. "The documents, Thomas. Now." Fletcher clutched the case tighter. "This land should have been mine. Simmons promised—" "He promised nothing in writing," Wade interrupted, "which is why you're trying to steal my deed rather than contesting it legally. Hand it over." For a tense moment it seemed Fletcher might refuse, but Blackwood unexpectedly intervened. "Give." It to him, Fletcher, this approach was ill-conceived from the start. But you said— I said we needed the water rights, Blackwood cut in smoothly. I never specified theft as the method. There are always other properties, other opportunities. His gaze lingered on Catherine. Other acquisitions worth pursuing. The implication sent a chill through Catherine, but she maintained her composure, keeping the derringer steady. Fletcher, seeing his ally withdrawing support, threw the document case onto the floor with a curse. "This isn't over, Wade," he spat. "Neither of you belongs in Silver Creek. The town will see that eventually." Wade retrieved the case, checking that the deed was still inside. "I think today's town meeting demonstrated otherwise. Now get out, all of you. And if I see any of you on my property again, I won't wait for explanations." After the intruders had departed, Catherine slumped against the wall, the derringer finally lowering as tension drained from her body. Wade secured the door, then turned to survey the destruction of his home, books scattered, furniture overturned, personal possessions trampled. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, taking the small pistol from her trembling fingers. "Yes," she replied, drawing a deep breath. "Though I've never threatened anyone with a firearm before. It's not an experience I care to repeat." Wade's expression softened. "You were magnificent, terrifying but magnificent." Despite everything, Catherine found herself laughing, a release of nervous energy that Wade joined, the shared moment drawing them closer in the aftermath of danger. As they worked together to restore order to the cabin, Catherine was struck by the ease of their partnership, how naturally they moved around each other, anticipating needs, sharing tasks without discussion. By the time they had righted the furniture and reshelved most of the books, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the windows. Wade stoked the fire and prepared coffee. The domestic normalcy a stark contrast to the night's confrontation. They sat at the recently righted table, steaming mugs before them, exhaustion and relief mingling in the comfortable silence. "What happens now?" Catherine asked finally. "Fletcher and Blackwood have been thwarted, but not defeated. They'll try again, perhaps more subtly next time." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Blackwood strikes me as a man who cuts his losses. With the town council publicly supporting you and his attempt to seize my deed failed, he may decide Silver Creek isn't worth further investment of his time and resources." "And Fletcher?" "Wounded pride is a powerful motivator," Wade acknowledged. "But without Blackwood's backing, his options are limited. His financial troubles will force him to focus on preserving what he has, rather than pursuing vendettas." Catherine sipped her coffee, considering. "So we've won, at least for now." "We have," Wade agreed. "Though victory brings its own questions." "Such as?" Wade met her eyes directly. "Such as whether our alliance was merely strategic or something more permanent." The directness of the question caught Catherine off guard, though she'd been considering the same issue herself. "I've learned to be cautious about permanence," she said carefully. "My journey to Silver Creek began with promises from one man that proved entirely false, yet led you to another whose promises are not." Wade replied quietly. "I'm not Thomas Fletcher, Catherine. I don't seek a subordinate or an ornament, but a partner, someone whose mind challenges and complements my own." "And my excessive education?" she asked, a hint of playfulness softening the serious question. "Is precisely what drew me to you," he answered without hesitation. "Your intelligence, your courage, your willingness to defy convention for what you believe is right. These are rare qualities in anyone, man or woman." Catherine felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. "When I left Boston," she said slowly, "I thought I was sacrificing my intellectual life for the chance at companionship. I never imagined finding both in the same person." Wade reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Take the time you need to be certain. I've learned that the best things in life are worth waiting for. As the sun rose higher, painting the cabin in gold and amber light, Catherine looked at the man across from her. This complex, educated former outlaw who had recognized her value when others saw only her difference from their expectations. And in that moment, with dawn breaking on a new day, she realized she didn't need more time at all. Turning her hand beneath his, she interlaced their fingers. "I came west, seeking a husband who would value my mind," she said softly. "How fitting that I should find him not in the man who advertised for an educated wife, but in one who demonstrated through his actions what true respect looks like." Wade's smile, that rare transformative expression that revealed his soul, bloomed across his face. "Is that a yes, Dr. Montgomery?" "It's a yes, Mr. Wade," she confirmed, her own smile matching his. "Though I believe the proper title would be Medical Apprentice Montgomery for now." "For now," he agreed, rising to move around the table, drawing her to her feet. "But I have every confidence that one day Silver Creek will have its first fully qualified female physician, and I'll be proud to be known as Dr. Montgomery's husband." As Morgan Wade bent to kiss Catherine Montgomery in the sunlit cabin they had defended together, neither could have imagined how prophetic his words would prove. Within 5 years, Catherine would complete her medical certification through correspondence with the Women's Medical College, establishing a proper practice that served 3 counties. Morgan's quiet legal expertise would help draft legislation protecting married women's property rights in the territory. Thomas Fletcher eventually lost most of his ranch to debt, selling parcels to smaller settlers who formed a more diverse community than his cattle empire would have allowed. Silas Blackwood returned to Chicago, finding other opportunities for investment and acquisition, though rumors occasionally reached Silver Creek of his continued pattern with educated women. Silver Creek itself grew and prospered, its character shaped in no small measure by the educated mail-order bride who had been rejected for knowing too much, and the reformed outlaw who recognized that her mind was her greatest asset rather than her liability. Their partnership, in medicine, in law, in life, became a cornerstone of the community, proving that true value often lies precisely where others fail to see it. In the years that followed, many young women with dreams beyond traditional boundaries would find their way to Dr. Montgomery's office, seeking not just medical care, but inspiration. And Catherine, remembering her own journey, would tell them the truth she had discovered on the frontier. Education is never excessive. It's the beginning of freedom, the freedom to chart your own course, to recognize your own worth, and to find those rare souls who value you not despite your mind, but because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.